The LGBTQI community in Ireland has seen many positive changes. Decriminalisation in 1993, marriage equality, gender recognition in 2015, and an openly gay Taoiseach elected in 2017. But one area of Irish society that many people in the LGBTQIA+ community feel isn't as welcoming as it could be is sport. A 2015 study out in the fields found that 58% of Irish respondents believe homophobia is more of an issue in sport than other areas of society. 75% said they witnessed or experienced homophobia in sport. And this programme will talk to people from the community involved in sport and find out what has changed and what still needs to change. This is Playing with Pride. My name is Donal Harkin and I'm a volunteer with ShoutOut. ShoutOut is a registered charity that goes into schools and workplaces to give workshops on LGBTQI+ issues and topics. I first became involved in 2017 after I came out, due to my own struggles accepting my sexuality. I grew up in rural Donegal where sport was very important, and my parents were very keen I was involved and they put me into various sports. But even back then I felt I was different. I didn't know I was gay, but other kids in sporting environments weren't that welcoming. They felt I wasn't manly enough or tough enough. So from an early age I started to hate sport and would not go at all, and instead spent my time with my pets, which I found safe. But after I came out, and when I was older, I kind of realised what I'd missed out on in sport. I wanted to find out if sport is now a welcoming place for young LGBTQIA+ people. I spoke to Ruan O'Criordan, Executive Director of ShoutOut, to find out ShoutOut's views on the community's involvement with sport.
For many young people, their local club is the beating heart of the community. And if they don't feel welcome in their local club as an LGBTI+ young person, they might not feel welcome in their community either. So we need to think about how we can protect young LGBTI+ people in our communities, especially in rural communities in Ireland where sports can be so vital to the community cultural and social life. And we need to make sure that we are taking those small steps which can have a really huge impact.
Talking with Ruan got me thinking about what's actually happening on the pitch, in particular with LGBTQI+ athletes. I sat down with representatives from various clubs to chat to them about it.
So thanks everyone for coming here today. We have Graham, who is a member for Emerald Warriors and captain of the Green Team. We have Owen, who is a coach with the Gaelica, the coach for the Men's Plus Gaelic football team. Sablai is a player rep for the Women's Plus team with the Gaelica as well. And Fionn is a board member of Sporting Pride. So who here was involved with teams before maybe they came out, and what was those experience like? So like non-LGBTQ+ specific teams. Do you want to go first, Owen?
Yeah, I started playing Gaelic for my club here in Dublin, Chemical Crokes, when I was, I think, 5 years old. You know, it was always a struggle just being gay in general. You know, I only spent one of those years out of the 17 as an openly gay player. So I was very much, I suppose, kind of kept to myself, you know, hidden away in the closet the whole time. But yeah, I mean, sport for me was, in Gaelic football especially, it was kind of like bittersweet because it was my escape. It was my way to kind of express myself, you know, on the football field. But on the other hand, it was, you know, these team sports are, you know, for me it was a constant reminder, I suppose, of the struggles that I was facing.
My experience is obviously slightly different to everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone being trans. Once I started realising I was trans when I was about 14, 15, it all stopped because obviously I'm female to male, so I was going from the girls team to the guys team, but obviously that didn't work out very well. And unfortunately, once the policies especially aren't supportive of you being who you are, I think, you know, it's very hard to get back into sports, unfortunately. Just for the trans and non-binary community, I do think we have a long way to go, but again, more positive stuff coming in the way.
Yeah, and just, sorry to jump in, but just what you said there, it is a kind of like a balancing act of, you know, taking your stance and not playing, but also, you know, we also need role models in these teams. That's something that I didn't have as a kid was role models and people to look up to, you know.
I completely agree with you. I think, you know, having somebody or even a club to be there as a representative for young people, I think it's extremely important because I did, I don't know about anyone here, regardless of being trans or not, just being a part of the LGBT community, I felt extremely left out because I just felt like there was just this stigma around me as a person regardless, and all I wanted to do was get on that court or on that field and play, just be myself, but I felt like I was being judged for that. I don't even get me started about changing rooms because that's a whole nother thing. There's a complete other conversation there about changing rooms, but I think, you know, it is important, like you said, to have people in the media or even have these clubs out there because they are going to help and change the future of sports.
And there's been lots of, positive changes among sports organisations now as well. So I suppose, Owen and Sabai, what kind of positive changes has the GA and the LGFA made, and also what do they still need to do, in your opinion?
One of the most important things, we all know we're going to be accepted amongst our LGBT plus peers, but that's not the scary part. It's how we're all looking for acceptance and validation from our straight peers, because that's where the fear stems from. So I think the Gaelic Players Association actually do quite a good bit of work involving inter-county players and ex-inter-county players, and just being there, walking in the parade, trying to get a better understanding, and yeah, it's really all about visibility.
So, Sabai, what has the LGFA done so far to increase the visibility in LGBTQ plus inclusion, and what do they still need to do, in your opinion?
Our team came under fire with some transphobic comments, and the LGFA were very responsive with it, and then they replied with a trans policy. Obviously, policies are there to keep our players safe, and that's always appreciated. I think there's always more steps for players to be taken, but I suppose that's the first step, is to have a policy in place to say that, well, here's the policy, that it's there so the players can play. We're not breaking any rules, we're not asking for much, just by letting everyone get involved and playing.
And Graham, I suppose in rugby, we've had quite a few people come out as LGBTQ plus in Ireland. We had Nick McCarthy, Jack Dunn. There's quite a few in the UK as well. So do you think our rugby in general doing a good job of making it more accessible and friendly to people who are LGBTQ plus, and what still needs to be done?
I think the one thing probably where work does need to be done is probably in trans inclusion. Last year, the IRFU updated their transgender inclusion policy, which unfortunately excludes trans women from competing in the women's game. So I suppose that's something that we would like to see reviewed and changed, so that we're not actually excluding anyone from the sport at all.
Okay, thanks for that, Graham. And then I have a question for the whole group. What do you make of people who say we shouldn't have LGBTQ plus specific teams, because if a real goal is total inclusivity and complete acceptance, then therefore there should be no need for these teams in the first place? Why do they exist at all?
Yeah, I think if it wasn't for the Warriors, I wouldn't be playing sport. So I think at the moment where we are in Ireland, we definitely need queer safe spaces. So why not have queer safe spaces where people play sports as well?
I think because we're doing no harm, first of all, we're doing no harm, and there is spaces that we can enter, like the outhouse and places we can contact, but it's different when you're building a sports bond. You're on the pitch and then you're off the pitch doing whatever.
We already have limited safe spaces for us as queer people anyway, so I think just creating another one, like you said, does no harm.
Yeah.
So to finish it all up, guys, I want you to tell me one thing for each of the sports you play you'd like to see change in the next few years to make it more welcoming and inclusive for people, for the community. So
More role models. Look, it's tough enough to come out in general, and so I can't imagine that being a high profile player makes it any easier. That's why it's so admirable when the likes of Donal Logue came out and kind of led the way, and the likes of Nick McCarthy are coming out now. It is tough, but it is, in my opinion, what we need to really make a change.
I'm going to say more inclusive policies across the board for all sports. I think policies, like you said, keep players safe and making it more inclusive for everybody. So
I would agree with Owen. Definitely more role models, but I also feel like, as you were saying, I don't think the information is filtered down through county teams and club-wide teams. So definitely keep on with the visibility. I know they have the Rainbow Laces campaign, but I feel like it pops up every June and then it goes back in. If we could keep things like that going year round, maybe it create a safe space for across the country, not just our club in Dublin and Erica Ula in Belfast.
I would say greater trans inclusion in rugby. I think to be excluded from sport because of your particular gender or identity is would be heartbreaking for me, to be told you can't play sport because you're you're being your true self. So I think definitely without a doubt, the inclusion of trans women in competitive women's rugby has to happen.
The involvement of trans people in sport has become a very divisive topic. I wanted to get the views and thoughts of trans athletes on what the current landscape was like. So thanks so much for joining us today. We have Matt and Julia, who are both members of the trans community. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Matt, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks so much, Donal. So my name is Matt. My pronouns are he, him. I'm involved in boxing, and I'm also a PhD student in trans studies. So I have a particular interest in sport, like personally and from a research perspective.
Great, thank you. And Julia?
Hi, Donald. My pronouns are she and her. My name is Julia, as you said. I currently play Gaelic football with Naga Laraka in the Women Plus team, and I also play tag rugby with Emerald Warriors. I came back to team sport after I moved to Ireland, and I moved to Ireland after I started my medical transition with all my paperwork in place. So the main challenge was that many people in that team were not familiar with what they were facing at the time. Most of them never met a trans person in their own lives. There were very few non-straight people in the team. And eventually I was asked if I could use the referee changing room. It wasn't really an issue because we were during COVID, so we weren't allowed to use changing room at all. But as soon as the government lifts some restriction and they saw the possibility of going back to normal, they wanted to have this conversation with me. And to be fairly honest, I just left the club and I moved to a different place. And I moved to a different club starting from that conversation. I went to this new club and I told them, listen, I'm here because in the other club this thing happened. So if this thing here will not happen, I may decide to stay, to train with you and see if I like it. But for me, it was literally putting my foot down, make it clear that I was changing the club for that reason. So I demanded the new club to act accordingly. And I had to say that they did very well. It was a totally different environment. And I'm talking about two clubs that are not promoting themselves as explicitly inclusive.
Okay, great. And what about yourself, Matt? What kind of challenges did you face when you decided to go back into sport?
I think because when I started into boxing initially, I hadn't medically transitioned. I suppose, and kind of questions around, similar to what Julie had mentioned around like what changing room would I use, and a lot of that definitely felt quite challenging when I just wanted to turn up to the space and just train like everybody else. And it is disconcerting when you're doing something that is quite heavily combative and that someone is trying to figure out what your gender is and you're not really sure if that's coming from a place of hostility.
So there definitely were challenges there for both of you, I think, coming back into sport again. What do you think are the main challenges facing trans people getting engaged in sport overall, if you look at it from different sports and different clubs and whatever? What are the main challenges? Matt, you go first, because I know you two won't be sure who's going to go. It'll be a Mexican standoff here, so Matt, you can go first.
I feel like I could list a massive amount of issues.
He's
but
the diplomat. He's a
I think there's tangible kind of a failure, particularly in an Irish context, for I think sports to maybe reckon with the ways in which homophobia, biphobia and transphobia are present in sport. I think there can sometimes be a denial that is just something that is often part of sporting environments. And I think as well, there's a lack of education, and there can kind of be a bit of a resistance to wanting to be educated about what it can mean to make LGBT people feel more comfortable, particularly trans people, in those sporting environments. And I think that if there was less of a focus on, this is going to be so much effort for us to try and be inclusive and well educated around this, instead of thinking, well, actually we can transform people's lives, not just the LGBT people who get involved, but actually, the communities more generally tend to thrive when there is a greater sense of diversity, respect and regard for people's differences.
And Julie, what do you think are some of the main challenges kind of stopping and preventing trans people from being involved in sport?
Yeah, the answer or the action, the support from my colleagues player was always incredibly nice and supportive, surprisingly sometimes. Most of the troubles come from management, from the lowest level, that is the coach of a team, to national sport boards, or even more to international sport bodies. Talking about physical challenges, I believe myself and Matt share very different experiences. Trans women are considered to be stronger, faster, with better stamina, endurance, performance overall, which is not actually true. The main challenge comes from the fact that no one is showing genuine interest in studying trans women bodies and see where we stand. So main challenges, I would say, lack of science, lack of interest in developing relevant science, and lack of education and consequentially paperwork to back our cases.
So can you give me some examples of some of this kind of anti-trans policy that's happening in sport, like whether it's worldwide or whether it's national?
Well, I think like World Rugby decisions, I think those particular policies, like, you know, an outright ban on trans women and girls, like the logic behind that, you know, does speak to a kind of a culture of trans misogyny, whether we feel comfortable acknowledging it as such or not. Okay,
thank you. And like just one last question for you both. So what would you say to people who are saying, no, people who are trans should not play sports, it's not fair? What would you say to those people who are saying this? Because there is obviously a big court saying that. What would you both say to those people now? You can go first.
If they don't have like decent data, don't even accept the conversation. Okay. I don't play pigeon chess. It's just like, no.
What would you say to them, Matt?
I think I'd maybe want to understand a little bit about where that anxiety is coming from, because I think a lot of it, you know, my own kind of relationship and work in this area is that people have been informed by a lot of misinformation. Either that's through, you know, research that isn't kind of credibly generated, or this kind of political kind of fear mongering from people who have, you know, a dedicated intention to reduce the spaces in society where trans people, particularly trans women, can exist safely. So I'd want to understand a little bit more about why someone feels such an attachment to the idea that there should be only two gender categories and very particular types of men and women should get to play that sport. And I think when you hear that out loud, it should set off alarm bells a little bit. Yeah, I'm definitely to a certain degree willing to have these kind of conversations to understand where people are at, but as long as it's coming from a place of good faith as opposed to hostility.
Okay, well, thank you so
We really need trans and intersex inclusive policies within each sport. These need to be led by national and international governing bodies. They should be grounded in fairness, inclusion, and rigorous evidence, and they shouldn't be driven by cultural discourse or the latest toxic conversation around trans rights.
Policy is important, but visibility is key. There has been a lack of professional athletes coming out and being open about their sexuality or gender identity. I reached out to Jack Dunn, who was the first professional male Irish rugby player to come out as bisexual. Jack spoke to me about role models in sport. Today we are speaking to rugby player Jack Dunn, who played for Leinster and now currently plays for Exeter. And Jack made history coming out as bisexual there about a year or two ago. The first Irish rugby player to come out as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. So Jack, you were involved with rugby from an early age, and you're professional and you played for Leinster and now played for Exeter. I suppose as you were getting, more into rugby, more involved, was there kind of this worry that, if I'm going to be this, professional rugby player and this perceived maybe heteronormative environment, it's going to be difficult for me to be different and be open about who I am? Was that a concern you had probably growing up and as you became more involved in rugby and became professional?
I didn't actually think I was going to be a professional player, so that really wasn't on my mind at all. I did definitely wait until I'd finished playing senior club rugby in sixth year to kind of tell everyone. I told a few friends before, but I said I'd wait until that season finished before I told anyone, so it was definitely on my mind.
What do you think about, because I suppose in sport in general there's not a lot of openly LGBTQ+ players. Let's say in Ireland, for instance, you came out, then Nick McCarthy came out as gay, Donal Ogo-Cusack is the only former senior GA player I think that's ever came out, and then obviously Valerie Mulcahy. So overall I think a lot of sports people are hesitant
maybe to come out and be open. You know, can you tell us more why you think that is?
Yeah, like you were talking about earlier, a lot of LGBT people have had bad experiences with sports. So I kind of think because there's always that question, why are there no gay or bi men in sport? And I think a lot of them definitely get squeezed out when they're 16 or 17 because they don't feel welcome and they don't have the opportunity to go professional. And then I think there is just always that bit of doubt, like, oh, if I tell people, how are they going to react? And for some people, sport's massive, and it's, do you want to risk sport to tell people the truth?
So what would you say, Jack, then to maybe other, professional athletes out there who maybe want to come out and be more open about their sexuality or gender identity?
Yeah, I think your private life is your private life at the end of the day. So if you're feeling pressure to come out, I think it's your decision, and you don't have to do it for anyone other than yourself. But if you're maybe thinking about it and you think you'd like to, but you might be a bit anxious, I've only had positive experiences really, aside from one or two Twitter bots. But I'd recommend it.
Do you think it would be important for young LGBTQ plus people involved in sport to see more people at the top level of sport like yourself to come out and be who they are? Do you think would that help?
Definitely, yeah. I think representation is so important. So it'd be great to see more LGBT people involved in the high level sport. And I think things are changing. You see, like 10 years ago, there was no one, and now there's different people across all sorts of sports who are coming out. Hopefully, just the tide keeps going.
And what do you think, the governing bodies of sport need to do? What would you like to see change and done to make the sport more accessible?
I think just education is the main one. Like ShoutOut's main kind of philosophy is, if people aren't ignorant of something, they're less likely to be intolerant of it. So I think going into rugby clubs or football clubs or anything at a young age, explaining what this is about, and people will be less afraid of things maybe. And if you're an LGBTQ kid sitting in the club and you see people reacting and going, "Oh, okay, that's grand," then you feel more inclined to stay involved with the club.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the top level guys? Because they're the ones that make decisions. If you now could sit down with the IRFU board or whatever, what would you say you'd like them to do?
See, I don't think any massive steps really need to be taken. I mean, it's just small things that are making people maybe feel a bit uncomfortable. So I'm going to plug ShoutOut as I used to work with them. So I think get a group like ShoutOut, doesn't have to be them, but get them in to help just foster that culture of inclusivity.
So that's a really good point. I think, having those maybe kind of early workshops or kind of interventions in all clubs all over the country, and that'll hopefully change attitudes and make it more so people know from an early age that if they are LGBTQ plus or whatever, they'll be welcome and it'll be a safe zone for them. What would you say to any maybe young people who are maybe 14, 15, they're kind of realising now that they're LGBTQ plus, they're playing sport and they're feeling a little bit alienated, maybe they're hearing comments, maybe they're like, oh, this isn't for me. What would you say to them, and how would you encourage them maybe to stay in sport? Or
just stick with it. Sport's brilliant. Some of my best friends I've made through sports, and maybe if you feel confident enough, have those conversations with your friends, because I know so many people say things like gay or other words just not out of spite or malice, just because that's what people say. They don't even recognize what they're saying. Like sometimes friends of mine have said something and you say to them, "Man, you shouldn't be saying that," and they go, "Oh, actually, yeah, you're dead right. I'm really sorry." And then they try not to say it then for the rest of their life, hopefully. So just sport's brilliant and connects people, and it's fantastic in so many avenues. So just stick with it and have those conversations if you feel like you can.
It's really important to have LGBTI plus visibility at that kind of elite international level, because it does show young people all around the world that LGBTI plus people belong in sports, and it shows young people all around the world that they can be allies when their favourite Premier League player wears an armband or stands up for LGBTI rights or stands up against anti-LGBTI policies. That does go a really long way with many, many young people.
The Unity Round is an initiative by United Rugby to promote LGBTQI plus inclusion in the sport. I spoke to Adam Redmond, Head of Broadcasting and Communications for United Rugby, to talk about the round and how they hope it'll change things. How do you hope an event like this can grow and promote inclusion, diversity within rugby for people who are LGBTQ plus over the years?
I think it's just about repetition of the message, year on year, that this is part of our calendar. And I think it's, making sure that everybody, whether you're on the playing side or you're involved in the team, that, you're in a welcoming space and that you got the support of everybody around you, or whether you're in the stands, and so that, when you come to one of our games or you get involved in rugby, it's an inclusive environment and everyone's happy to be here because they're all going to concentrate on watching the 80 minutes. But I think that the wider one for me is just to make sure that everybody within rugby understands how easy it is to be an ally, because that makes such a difference in a person's life if they choose to share, who they want to be and be themselves. So whether that's colleagues, friends, family, and that's what I'd really hope we get out of this, is teaching people to be allies, because the more allies you have, then the more inclusive you'll be just by its nature.
I went down to the sidelines to chat with players and see what they think needs to change.
I think to make sport more LGBTQ plus inclusive, I think we need to embrace the whole community, regardless of all the pluses. We need to include everyone, and I think acknowledging the barriers faced by men and women who are LGBTQ, that the barriers are different for men, for women, for non-binary people, for trans people. I think if we can acknowledge them and tackle them, that will really, really help a stepping stone towards making all sports more LGBTQ plus inclusive.
I think there has been huge changes in society, but in terms of changes that are still required, there is still quite a macho culture surrounding a lot of sport. So an inclusive club and a safer environment for players. As well as that, you can see even in other sports like football that there's very few players who are openly out. So there's a question there about how comfortable people feel about being out in those sports. Other changes might include fan culture, because that can be still a little toxic, a little macho, even though there have been really significant changes in society in the last couple of years.
I think when it comes to making sports more LGBTQ plus inclusive, it comes down to transgender inclusion, and I mean the LGFA has obviously made steps in the right direction for trans inclusion with their trans inclusion policy, but I do think that needs to be seen across other sports, across other clubs in the country and globally.
I think sport in general, to be more inclusive, it needs to be inclusive of trans people, for example. Like, trans people are still not allowed to play rugby. For example, I think the lack of visibility at the top levels as well is a real issue. I think we need more like top tier rugby players, top tier soccer players coming out, just to make it more visible, so that young kids can see that it's okay to be gay, and you can be gay and play sport, and it's just completely accepted.
Yeah, one thing that could be done to kind of make sport more inclusive for LGBT people is, at least specifically with Nigel Erica, is if we got more funding. Like, we get a bit from the GAA, but at the moment now we've no home grounds. We're renting around Dublin, so it would be great. We've put in a capital grant application, so it'd be great if we could get some money out of that just to keep us going, because we're doing a great job. We're encouraging people to get back into the sport, so any kind of money whatsoever would be really great for us.
Every sports club, whether it's soccer teams, rugby teams, GA teams, and where there is kind of people who would be not welcoming to people of this community, and I think it's down to those individuals. Maybe the organisation can target them and stuff like that. It's definitely changed. 20 years ago, like I said, there was nobody, now it's a completely different environment.
I think sport could be made more inclusive for LGBTQ plus people if there was more visibility of gay people playing sports. I think it would be great if there was more role models for people who are openly gay. I know it's challenging to come out as openly gay if you're a top level sports person, but I think it would be really positive if people could act as that kind of role model. And then specifically in terms of the GAA, I think the GAA has done a lot for us, but there's always more, and I think in particular it's kind of incumbent on GAA clubs across the country to ensure that their clubs are inclusive and welcoming for people from LGBTQ plus backgrounds.
I think specifically speaking about the GAA, it's come quite far in the past number of years. GAA centrally has been very supportive to Nigel Erica. And I think by being more supportive to other clubs around the country and supporting them wholeheartedly, that will show that the GAA is representative of Irish culture.
Well, I think it has to start from the top, and there has to be a real buy-in from the very top levels within the FAI, and unfortunately that has not and continues not to be the case. There needs to be better supports also for football clubs so that they can actually address instances where they arise of homophobic, transphobic, biphobic and other prejudicial abuse at games. Clubs at the moment get advice on this, but they don't get actual support as to how they can, in a match day situation, deal with issues like that. And I think also thirdly, there probably needs to be increased funding for clubs in Irish football and organisations in Irish football so that they can actually put in place programmes of education and training for their coaches, for their players, for their volunteers and so on. Because a lot of football clubs and organisations in the country just maybe don't have the funding to do that, and for them to prioritise that, they probably do need increased funding.
We have heard how representation and policy is very important, but making those changes can be very daunting for clubs and sporting organisations. But they don't have to do it alone. ShoutOut and other organisations offer advice and support on how to navigate these processes.
So ShoutOut has worked with a number of national governing bodies, sporting associations, clubs and teams to promote LGBTI inclusion within their sports through training and education. We've worked with the likes of the GAA, the Camogie Association and Bohemians Football Club to make sure inclusivity and visibility are preserved for players really at every level, from youth all the way up to senior and elite levels of sport. Every young person has a right to play sport, whether they're trans, intersex, gay, lesbian, bisexual, they all have a right to play and participate fairly along with their peers.
I wonder what my relationship with sport could have been like had these hurdles not been in my way. Through the process of this documentary, I have learned we still have a long way to go. However, change is happening, and I'm confident that sporting organisations, clubs, players, supporters will all make the necessary changes so that everybody can play with pride.